Yeah, I think a lot of my cases probably could be in Bond films, as I always think, given the locations and the plots. I think it'd probably be trialed by combat. I'd probably be a champion, 6'7" and built like a rock. So you'd have to give me that sort of armor uh, to play with. Oh God, that's a really good one.
Hello, hello, and welcome to the latest episode of But Is It Legal? The podcast with me, Simon Marshall, from TBD Marketing. And today I'm joined by Mahnaz Malik, who is from 20 Essex. Mahnaz, can you introduce yourself and tell everyone a bit about what you do for a living?
Thank you, Simon, for having me here. I'm thrilled. I'm a barrister. I'm an arbitrator at Twenty Essex, and I'm a fellow at Hughes Hall, Cambridge University.
Amazing. Tell me a bit about the day to day then. You spend your time in arbitrations in various different jurisdictions around the world. Is that the day job?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's pretty much a job on the run, I would say. I'm sort of running between jurisdictions, time zones, cases, and at the moment I'm also wearing two hats, which is counsel and arbitrator. So it's a lot of juggling in the air, literally.
Is it everything you hoped for? When you first got inspired and you thought, "I'm gonna go into the law," is this the life that you were kind of hoping to live as a barrister?
I think as an 18-year-old, that's what international arbitration rather shallowly, at least represented to me that, it meant going to all these exotic locations and and sort of meeting interesting people, and that's exactly what it's delivered. So I can't complain. But what I probably hadn't anticipated was the management of time and travel, which can be quite a delicate one.
Do you manage yourself, or do you have someone else that manages your time for you? How does it work?
I have the clerks managing my diary, but I also manage a lot myself, given I'm constantly traveling, and sometimes it's much easier to do it on the go. So yes, I managed to get on.
I've seen over the course of the months, I think you seem to travel quite a bit. I think you're one of my favorite people to look at on LinkedIn in terms of your feed and the posts that you're doing as well. Do you enjoy that aspect of the role, being able to kind of get out there and get into the world and see different cultures and jurisdictions?
Simon, I mean, I've been traveling, I guess, ever since I started work. And what's really interesting is because I was so, I guess, as you get more senior and older, you become more comfortable in your role. You get a confidence, and in a sense, you can look around a little bit more. And I think what I've learned to do is, in a sense, keep focused, but whilst having a coffee, taking the time to look out of the window and see sort of the wonder that lies there. So it's been a beautiful shift where if I'm in a hearing room or if I'm in a meeting room now, I'm obviously looking at the papers and I'm deeply involved with the case and my colleagues. But what I'm learning to do is just gaze out of that window and see the street outside and see what wonderful places I have the privilege of going to. And, on the way back on the flight, just learning to scribble a few thoughts, which you sometimes see on LinkedIn.
Where have you enjoyed most recently visiting? I've seen various different jurisdictions, but what's been your favorite highlight of the last year?
I think I've done a lot to Turkey, which has been great. Recently, I was in Morocco, and I wrote about that, and that was very different and interesting. I guess everywhere has that wonderful wonder, and that's what I'm really enjoying. It's almost like a new awakening, as far as I'm concerned. Thanks to LinkedIn, really, which gives me the discipline to put something in a few hundred words and just get it out of my system.
Let me explain to people who maybe haven't come across your post though. I would say that they're like you like the Anthony Bourdain of the legal world, right? I think that you travel, there's always some food or comfort involved somewhere along the line as well. And then there's this beautiful sense of history. And I think that the posts I've enjoyed most about yours are the ones that take us from one point to another on your travels as well. So we get a sense of kind of going with you, as it were. Is that something you've always loved? The history, the travel, the food side of things?
I've always loved food. I mean, I come from a family of sort of foodies where sort of at breakfast we start thinking about dinner and lunch and then, and the next day's meal. So I'm incredibly food motivated, probably as food motivated as your dog, Monty, if I remember his name correctly. So yes, I think that's a real joy. But I think food also connects us with people, across languages, across sort of borders, really, because it's such a human act and it's such a beautiful sort of thing to share a meal together. And our earliest memories sometimes are about food. So I find it a real sort of, literally breaking bread with someone is an incredibly wonderful experience, and you learn so much about the place through food. Yes, so I've always loved food, but it's only recently that I've learned to use it perhaps as a way of learning more about a place and sharing that experience with people.
Do you find that it comes into play when you're kind of doing arbitrations? Do you actually like have meals with each side, as it were, as well, and then make sure that maybe not when you're the arbitrator, but you're trying to bring parties together? Is breaking bread still like a commercial option? Does it make a difference to negotiations?
I think I mean, I don't do, I'm more adversarial, so I haven't really got to the level of I guess Zen to have a meal in the middle of hearing with my sort of opponent as yet. But I do sort of spend a lot of time sharing meals, all sorts of meals, from sort of burgers and pizzas at sort of 3 in the morning, to something a bit more ornate at the end of a hearing with my team. And I think that's been a real joy to share, and especially if you're in their jurisdiction, you learn a lot about, their food um, as well.
I
God,
love
Simon,
that.
we've ended up talking a lot about food, as you can
That's okay.
imagine.
Let's move on. We tell me a bit to the day job then. On the high stakes arbitration, international disputes. How much of it is about preparedness, and how much of it is a kind of mental game, and that the psychology of kind of being an advocate, as it were. How much is legal argument versus how much is it's in your head.
I think it's incredibly important to be prepared, and I think that's one of the, I don't want to sing the praises of the bar, but I think one of the wonderful aspects of training at the bar is your ability to really get into your brief fully. Because at the end of the day, it's just you, it's your name, and you need to know every single page in the documents bundle. And I think that level of understanding your case rather than it be spread amongst several people in a team sometimes is just hugely important, but also quite, difficult, because you're carrying a lot of documents in your head at the time of the hearing. But you can prepare and prepare. But what you also need to learn to do is be very quick on your feet. And I know it sounds a bit like a cliche, but there is no, I guess, way around it, because a case will morph, it will change. And I remember one case where, from losing, we went to winning in the last 5 minutes of the closing. And I've never seen it happen. And luckily, I was on the winning side. But I remember thinking, what if I was on the other side? I mean, how awful would it be, to just have this one battle suddenly just turn to dust because, a point came up, which frankly, none of us um, on either side, including the arbitrators, had really picked up on. So you really need to be very quick on your feet.
I had down here a question about the skills that you might advise a younger barrister, a future barrister to have, and I've heard that preparedness and that ability to be nimble on your feet. Is there anything else that you would kind of add to that skill set for people who are thinking about a career at the bar?
I think what I've learned to do, and it sounds incredibly spiritual, but the bar has been doing that for centuries, is you really need to get to the essence of a case. And that comes with experience. But if you can think about the hundreds of pages of documents you get, and I think we have sort of issues in dispute that we put out to the adjudicators, as in what are the issues that we need to decide. And that comes in a bit late. But I think if you learn to, in a sense, have feel of the case, understand what is this case really, really about, and what if you were the adjudicator, what issues would turn which way, your client will win or lose. I think that's an incredible tool to have, and it's not something that's taught, perhaps. It's something you learn on the job. But if you can, in a sense, train yourself from an earlier stage to get to that, because that's the end of the game, right? I mean, someone has to decide an issue, and that's going to determine whether you win or lose. And if you can figure out what that issue is earlier on, then life will be a bit easy for everybody concerned, rather than going into highways and byways.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually got another question, which is about what's the most common mistake that people make at the junior end of their careers, and maybe that's the answer. Maybe it is that they don't get close to understanding the core issue that's going to be decided by the person who's going to make the decision. Are there any other errata that people kind of regularly do, and you think, oh, I've definitely, I've ironed that out of my practice now. I don't do that anymore.
I think it's really tuned into what you were saying, Sam, and it's really getting into the heart of the case, the essence of the case, and
Mm.
realizing that this whole, litigation or arbitration has a purpose to it. It's not here to, in a sense, discuss fancy legal arguments or, you really need to get to what is the essence of a case. And I think that's the one thing I don't see junior practitioners doing. And frankly, I didn't do it either. It's something I've learned in the job, and I wish I could go back and teach it to myself.
Yeah, I think I'd observe as somebody who's marketed like Lewis solicitors in particular over the years as well, that I think people can lose sight of one objective that's never spoken, which is we'd like to have an ongoing relationship with these people. This is a business arrangement. We want to continue to do business with them. We just
Yeah,
want to be recompensed for all this thing that's gone wrong, right? And
exactly.
actually, you've got a very difficult task to do, which is to resolve a dispute, but allow an ongoing relationship to continue to work as well. And I think that must be very hard to do at times. Have you ever had a case that you thought, guys, would make a great Netflix drama? If only I kind of had the opportunity, I'd love to have a Netflix conversation with the producer.
Yes, I think hearings are incredibly dramatic. And, the finale of a hearing where the whole, storytelling is at its peak are just incredible. But it's yeah, I think a lot of my cases probably could be in Bond films, as I always think, given the locations and the plots. But um, I guess one tends to be a bit biased about one's own cases, and everyone thinks they have a very interesting and exciting case. And it's just, there's nothing quite as boring as listening about other people's cases at the end of your own long day. So I'm a bit skeptical about, whether I'm to be trusted when I say, well, a lot of my cases will make great dramas. But yeah, I guess some of them, maybe one or two.
And in your head, then I guess the next obvious question is: do you have like walk-up music? Do you have music? Like you might do if you're a boxer. But when you come into the courtroom, do you think, oh, I think this is a soundtrack they should be playing as I come into the room?
It's it's funny, I'm going to now really sort of think about that one, Simon. You really got me there. I have like a very much a running soundtrack, or when I do weights, I have a soundtrack. So I have various sort of themes of music, or when I work or I draft, I have music, but I haven't quite got to the stage where I have a soundtrack for a case or a hearing. But I think that's a really good
Maybe
idea.
maybe we can crowdsource it in the comments when we release the episode on special tomorrow, right? To see if people are willing to make some recommendations as well there. If you could travel back in time and argue a specific case or in a specific era in the past, maybe or even a location, where would you go? What would you go and fight for? What would be the court that you'd want to be heard in?
I think it'd probably be trial by combat. I'd probably be a champion.
Tell me more details about that. For the uninitiated, what does it involve?
Well, in the old days, you could pick a champion to sort of, it was all very primitive and primordial. And, the reason I say this is I think, sort of, I guess, we are still evolving in terms of really creating a system of justice where the weak as well as the strong get a fair and a good trial. And I think we're nowhere near that, at least across the world. And if you're asking me to go back to time, probably the odds would be even worse from what they are. So I just think, what might as well just throw in the lot and just go in to the most primitive way, which is basically trial by combat, where parties in medieval times, especially in Europe, would choose a champion to fight over who's right or wrong, and it was just pure brute force and luck that had them win. So yes, I guess that's what I would probably probably
Bringing a
say.
touch of Game of Thrones to the kind of modern bar, as it were, kind of thing.
Absolutely. I mean, that's we are still very adversarial, really, and in some case, barristers are seen as champions, but they're not. Obviously, we don't fight with each other. We actually try and persuade an adjudicator. So actually, the system's very different. But yes, if I were to go back to sort of old times, perhaps I'd just go back to the very basics.
I
And I
do like
probably
it.
would lose really badly. I'd have to be sort of 6'7" and built like a rock. So you'd have to give me that sort of armor uh, to play with. Wouldn't want to
Yeah,
fight like me.
I really do like it as well. And such a great answer. If you could only use legal jargon for a week, what's the phrase that you'd use most often over the course of that week, do you think?
Oh God, that's a really good one. Um, Inter alia.
I use inter alia. I say it most weeks. I get an eye roll from the 12-year-old every time I say it as well.
Yes, inter alia, I think, yes.
Tell me a bit about the languages side of things. I've got a sense that you don't only speak English. Do you speak other languages as well?
Yeah, so I speak Urdu. I speak a very strange language called Hindko, which nobody knows about. It's a subvariant of it's a regional language spoken in the northern areas of Pakistan, and I speak Hindi because Urdu and Hindi are very close. I understand a bit of Persian. I can read Arabic, but I'm completely terrible at understanding it. So yes, I have a host of languages, and I can order coffee and sparkling water in nearly every language in the world. So yeah.
Do you ever dream in another language?
It's interesting. I sort of have dreams that are more visual than vocal. So I think they, in a sense, sort of language becomes a bit OTOs in them. So yes, I don't think I dream in words as much as I do in visuals.
And given the amount of travel that you do and the that takes you all across the world, do you polish up on some phrases before you go and travel to a new jurisdiction, maybe with a language that you haven't used before? Do you think, oh, here's an opportunity to kind of add to my vocabulary, as it were?
It's interesting. I should. But I read up about the history of a place before I
Mm.
go, more than the language. And perhaps, I should be a little bit more polite and learn how to say thank you before I touch ground. But that's the first phrase I usually learn is thank you and, how to greet someone. And then slowly you learn about coffee and black coffee without, and without sugar, and then all the nuances kick in. But what I find incredible is that the kind of weird phrases you pick up. Like, for example, in Turkish, I know what pasture means in Turkish, which makes no sense, or what a memorandum is, and how to order black coffee without sugar. So you pick up strange phrases according to what you're working on and what you're eating and drinking. So you're back to food, Simon. We are back to food.
I didn't mean to get that route necessarily. I think that
I took you back to food. That was me.
well, I think, it's always a good question to ask as well. I think the English language has traveled well around the world, but I think the English legal system has traveled very well around the world as well. And it's that ability to travel globally, I think, when you speak English and are operating, under UK law or under some form of
Hmm.
arbitral system that's based on UK, and certainly probably done in English as well. It means that you can get to travel the world quite easily as well. We're quite lucky, really, to work in a system that has that international phase. Do you think that we are well set to preserve that position over coming years?
I think it's an incredible gift to be, part of the Commonwealth, to have common law, to have
Mm.
a language. So I think a lot of people focus on the English language as being incredibly elastic and how it enables us to, go through several, if not many, almost most countries in the world. And given the internet, we speak a lot about the English language, but we speak less about the law and how common law is such a gift in the way it unites us across so many, you know, tens of countries and jurisdictions. And you're absolutely right. I don't think we've um fully, in a sense, engaged with that. And it's a slightly sensitive topic because, you know, sort of pre-independence for a lot of the countries, there was no need because it was all one law, if you think about it. But it's really after the 60s and 70s when countries wanted to create their own laws. In a sense, you know, the common law is there, but English law then, in a sense, withdrew and almost distanced itself, and to let the countries get on with it. But the root is very much the same, and I think now is the time to engage with those different systems in a way which preserves their own development over the last 50, 60 years, but also
Mm.
ready to share the origins, whether by force or by choice. The fact is we shared those 100, 200 years of legal thought, of a
Mm.
legal system. And it's really finding that piece in that sort of commonality that can bring us closer
I think
together.
that's the exact word when I think of you as well. You've got this amazing ability to find some affinity with where you're going or what you're doing or how you're traveling to get there as well. So listen, Mahnaz, thank you so much for kind of doing this podcast today. I think for anyone who's listening who hasn't had the opportunity to follow you previously, definitely take the opportunity. There are posts like no other that you're going to find in the legal sector on LinkedIn. I promise you they'll be worth investing your time in as well. Mahnaz is one of the most lovely writers on LinkedIn out there. And then if you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to share it with others, please do. That'd be great to have you do that as well. Mahnaz, thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Simon. And can I say one thing? I fear you're entirely responsible for the madness on LinkedIn because I mean, I remember doing the odd post, and you were so kind to me, and you were so sort of wonderful, really. It was one of the wonderful examples of the kindness of strangers I have ever seen. I've always been very social media shy. I'm not on any other social media other than LinkedIn. And it was just wonderful to have that guidance. I wouldn't have written, I promise you, had it not been for your encouragement. And you can see how I've grown in confidence. So I also wanted to say thank you publicly for being such a hero.
Well, if that's a quid pro quo, I'll happily take it. Right? I get to read your posts, and you're very, very kind to say it's got anything to do with me whatsoever. If anyone gets a chance to read those, follow you, please do. I think you'll be richly rewarded for doing so as well. Manas, thank you again for today.